Ohtani blames Tanner Scott. Nobody expected him to say it. That is the part that stayed with everyone in that press conference room long after the cameras had been switched off and the reporters had filed out into the Atlanta night with their notebooks and their recordings, and the particular kind of energy that follows a moment nobody saw coming. Not because what Ohtani said was cruel. Not because it was calculated or political or delivered with any of the sharpness that public blame usually carries when one athlete points a finger at another. It was unexpected because it was Ohtani. Because in the years that this man has occupied the center of baseball's universe, through MVP seasons and historic contracts and performances that have repeatedly forced the sport to expand its vocabulary, he has almost never done this. He has almost never stood in front of a microphone and directed the weight of a loss toward a specific person wearing the same uniform. Almost never. Until Atlanta. Until a loss that sat differently than the other losses. Until a moment that apparently crossed a threshold that Ohtani, private, composed, relentlessly professional Ohtani, could not absorb in silence. He said what he said. And the room has not fully recovered from it yet. The game itself had been winnable. That was what made it so heavy afterward. That was the specific texture of the frustration that filled the Dodgers clubhouse in the hours after the final out, not the clean, uncomplicated frustration of being beaten by a better team on a better night, but the jagged, unresolved frustration of a game that was there and then was not there. A game that the Dodgers had built carefully across 7 innings and then watched come apart in the space of a few pitches. The Dodgers had led. The lead had felt manageable. The kind of lead that an experienced bullpen on a team with championship ambitions should be able to protect without extraordinary effort. The kind of lead that gets handed to the back end of the relief corps with the quiet confidence of an organization that has prepared for exactly this situation. Tanner Scott came in. And what followed was the kind of inning that pitchers spend entire off-seasons trying to forget and hitters spend entire careers hoping to see from the opposing side. It unraveled quickly. Not gradually, not with the slow accumulation of base runners and mounting pitch counts that at least offers the dugout time to consider alternatives. Quickly. In the way that bullpen collapses happen when a pitcher cannot locate his pitches and the opposing lineup recognizes that inability before the pitcher himself has fully accepted it. By the time it was over, the lead was gone. The game was gone. And in the visiting clubhouse at Truist Park, the Dodgers sat with the specific silence of a team that knows it has given something away that it cannot get back. Roberts made the decision about Scott before he spoke to the media. 5 games. That was the suspension. Delivered internally, communicated to Scott directly, with the kind of clarity that Roberts had been using more frequently in recent weeks, the clarity of a manager who has decided that the diplomatic version of accountability is no longer serving this team the way it needs to be served. 5 games is not a small number for a relief pitcher in the middle of a pennant race. It is not a gesture. It is not the organizational equivalent of a strongly worded conversation that everyone agrees to treat as a warning and then quietly moves past. It is a consequence. A real one. The kind that sits in a player's record and in the clubhouse atmosphere and in the conversations that happen between teammates when the cameras are not present. Scott received it. He did not appear publicly to contest it. Roberts had said what needed to be said in the room where it needed to be said, and the 5 games stood as the formal version of the same message. But Roberts' decision, significant as it was, became a secondary story before the night was finished. Because Ohtani spoke first. He had not planned to say it. That much seemed clear from the way it arrived, not as a prepared statement, not as the kind of carefully structured answer that players deliver when they have had time to consult with agents and communication staff about how to frame a difficult truth for public consumption. It arrived the way unplanned things arrive, directly, without preamble, in response to a question that opened a door Ohtani apparently decided not to close. A reporter had asked him, simply, what he thought had gone wrong in the 8th inning. Ohtani looked at the reporter. A moment passed. The kind of moment where you can see a person making a decision in real time, weighing the careful answer against the honest one and choosing, for reasons that only he fully understood, to go with honest. He spoke. The interpreter listened and translated. And what came through was something that no one in that room had prepared their notebooks for. He said Scott had not been ready. He said the situation had required a pitcher who was locked in, mentally, mechanically, completely committed to the moment, and that what he saw from Scott in that inning was not that. He said it without venom. He said it the way someone states a fact that they have processed and accepted and no longer feel the need to soften for the comfort of people who would prefer a gentler version of the truth. The room absorbed it. And then the room exploded quietly in the way press conference rooms explode quietly, with the frantic scratching of pens and the barely perceptible collective exhale of reporters who understand that they have just been given something real. The reaction inside the Dodgers organization was not simple. There are players who heard what Ohtani said and understood it immediately, not as a betrayal of a teammate, not as a violation of the clubhouse code that says certain things stay inside certain walls, but as the honest assessment of a competitor who holds everyone around him, including himself, to a standard that does not bend in the direction of comfort. There are players who heard it differently. Who felt the discomfort of watching a teammate named publicly in a loss. Who understood intellectually that what Scott had done in that eighth inning was indefensible by the numbers but felt instinctively that the place for that conversation was not in front of a camera. Scott himself heard it. What that was like, sitting somewhere in that clubhouse and learning that Shohei Ohtani, the person whose standards define what this team is supposed to aspire to, had stood in front of reporters and said that you were not ready, is something that cannot be fully reconstructed from the outside. It is the kind of moment that lives in a very specific place inside a professional athlete. A place where pride and accountability and the desire to be seen as someone who meets the moment collide with the undeniable reality of a scoreboard that says otherwise. Scott did not speak publicly that night. Roberts addressed the Ohtani comments the following morning. He had slept on them, or tried to, and arrived at his press availability with the expression of a manager who has had to locate the version of the truth that serves his team without contradicting the person on his roster whose opinion carries the most weight. It was a narrow path. A reporter asked him directly, "Were you surprised by what Ohtani said about Scott?" Roberts looked at the table for a fraction of a second. His hands were flat in front of him. He breathed in slightly before answering. Shohei holds himself to an incredibly high standard. His voice was measured. And he holds the people around him to that same standard. I don't think anyone in this organization should be surprised by that. The reporter followed, but publicly, naming Scott specifically, was that something you expected? Roberts paused longer this time. What I expect from Shohei is honesty. That's what I got. He looked up. What I expect from this team is to respond to honesty the right way. Not defensively. Not by protecting feelings that need to be challenged. By competing better. He didn't distance himself from what Ohtani had said. He didn't validate it with excessive enthusiasm either. He threaded the needle the way experienced managers thread needles, by making the answer about the team's response rather than the individual statement that had created the need for a response. But the needle had been threaded in Ohtani's direction. What nobody had yet said publicly, what lived in the conversations happening in quieter corners of that organization, was that Ohtani's words were not only about one inning in Atlanta. They were about something larger. About a standard that this team had been inconsistently meeting for weeks. About the gap between what the Dodgers are capable of being and what they had recently been choosing to become. Ohtani had not named Scott because he had a personal grievance against a relief pitcher. He had named Scott because Scott had been the most visible evidence of a problem that went deeper than one eighth inning collapse. And Ohtani, who does not say things he does not mean, who does not perform emotion for audiences, who competes with a consistency that makes everyone around him slightly uncomfortable about their own inconsistencies, had apparently decided that visible evidence deserved a visible response. That was the unexpected part. Not the honesty. Not the accountability. The willingness to be the one who said it. In the days that followed, the Dodgers returned to work in the way that professional athletes return to work, not by resolving every tension that a difficult loss and a more difficult postgame had generated, but by showing up and competing and letting the games provide the answers that the conversations could not. Scott served his suspension. He said nothing publicly about what Ohtani had said. He did not seek a microphone or a platform or any kind of response that would extend a story he clearly wanted to move past. Ohtani showed up the next day and went about his preparation with the same focused, almost unsettling consistency that defines him regardless of what has happened the day before. No apology for what he had said. No softening of the position he had taken in that press conference room. Just work. Just the next game. Just the standard applied to himself with the same unsparing clarity that he had briefly and publicly applied to someone else. One reporter caught him briefly before a workout and asked, almost apologetically, as if aware of the delicacy of the question, whether he had any regrets about what he had said after the Atlanta game. Ohtani looked at the reporter. The interpreter waited. And then Ohtani said the thing that nobody had quite anticipated, not after the blame, not after the suspension, not after 2 days of careful organizational navigation of an uncomfortable truth that one person had decided to speak out loud. He said he would say it again.